and you have to be honest, because if you agree with them, then you've really got something else that you need to be worrying about and working on. And if you don't agree with them, then you need to figure out, one, how can you go back to that source and question and challenge them? And two, what are you going to do about it within your own life to make sure that you don't pass those same thoughts and perceptions and notions down to your children or whoever else that you're surrounded by? Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Vex, VEX, and if you're new to this channel, you know that we like to take adulthood one day at a time here, and for the next couple of weeks I was going to be doing a law school series. I started off last week explaining just briefly my law school process, applying to law school, and then this week I was going to be focusing on the LSAT and my experience taking the LSAT. And I decided that it was probably a little inappropriate for me to just carry on with business as usual, given the current situation that our country is in right now, and given my own personal association with it, being an African-American woman. And I just felt that I had to come on here and say something because I didn't feel comfortable just sitting here talking about the LSAT enthusiastically as if nothing else was going on in the world right now. So that being said, I was thinking about what I wanted to say because I didn't really script anything. I just felt like I needed to give out a message from the heart, and I was really thinking about my channel and what it meant to kind of just growing up day by day, taking it one day at a time. And I kind of just thought about growing up as an African-American woman. I'm fully Ethiopian. Both of my biological parents are born and raised in Ethiopia and immigrated to America in the 90s, and I was born in 1997 in California. So technically speaking, I am Ethiopian, but I was born here, so I also am American. But I also identify as an African-American woman, and I've really always struggled with what that meant for me because it seemed like it was always a bit of a gray area as to where I really truly fit in, because biologically none of my roots are actually rooted in this country, but my stepfather is Black and his family is deeply, deeply rooted in this country in Southern Virginia. And those roots mean a lot of things, specifically slavery, and it's very difficult for me not to identify with that if my stepfather of almost like 18 years now, if that's his identity, how can I not also feel that when the rest of my family on his side also deeply identifies with the dark history in this country. I also think about growing up as an African-American woman in Northern Virginia specifically, a very predominantly white area, Arlington to be specific, and what it was like going through the school system and the people I was socialized around, and how that kind of affected me psychologically and emotionally, and how that also played a role in how I see myself and what I thought others perceived me as well. I grew up in very being identified as gifted, academically gifted, and being in classes where I would pretty much be the only African-American person, or maybe even person of color, minority, in the class. And I really didn't think of it as much when I was younger because I was so happy to be labeled as gifted, until I was getting into high school, and it just became so much of a stark contrast between me and the other people in the class. And I started to realize that these were really my main friends, which was fine. I had no problem being friends with white people or just people, non-minorities, but I was noticing that because of being in these classes for so long, my friends were not diverse really, and I started to become the only Black person in my friend groups, the only Black person in my classes, the only Black person on my team. I joined the rowing team, which is a historically predominantly white sport, an elitist sport at that, and it became very difficult to start to see where I fit in, because it was no longer fun for me to just be in these academically gifted or intensified classes anymore. I was actually starting to feel a little bit uncomfortable at the fact that it was going on almost 12 years of being the only Black kid in the classroom. That starts to take a toll on you when you're thinking about how people perceive you and how you perceive yourself. Because when you're in middle school and you're in high school, you're very impressionable at that age, and you're starting to think about boys, you're starting to think about trying to fit in with cool people and what those girls think of you. And I was, my social groups were just, white people, really. My social groups were white people, and I started to think about the way that my hair looked and how I really stood out from my friends, considering my hair took a diameter of about 12 inches from side to side, and all my friends' hair was laid straight. And the fact that when I would go to sleepovers, that I'm thinking about, okay, well, how am I supposed to protect my hair at night when all my friends have to do is go to sleep, wake up, and do their hair the next day? Or going to the pool became an issue, because after a certain point I just gave up on the curly hair, and my mom and I would straighten my hair every Sunday for 4 years straight, because I could not deal with the fact that my hair was so curly and did not look like everyone else's. So now I'm wearing my hair straight all the time, and going to the pool became an issue because my friends could just jump on right in, jump out, and their hair was the same. I jump in, all of a sudden my hair is curly, and people were like, whoa, your hair goes curly now? And I'm like, well, yes, this is actually my natural hair. You just put some water on it and then it turns curly. It's like magic. And just not wanting to have those conversations, not wanting to explain to people how my hair changes in different temperatures and different climates, or if I'm going in the water, if I'm not in the water, or if I want to straighten it and how it gets longer when I straighten it versus when it's curly and it's short. Just conversations that you just don't want to have with people, because you don't ask them about their hair, why their hair stays straight when they're in the water and when it's straight when they come out of the water, and that just became very tiring. And when I really think about growing up as an African American woman, hair is just the biggest theme and the biggest thing that is just attached to your identity for so long, especially growing up in the area that I grew up in. And I wish that I had been a little bit more aware of my surroundings and had surrounded myself maybe around more people of color, so that I could appreciate the way that I looked in my natural state more. I was also very aware, I was dating white men as well, and let's call them boys actually, because I was in high school, so I dated white boys, and that also became an issue for me and my identity, because I was like, well, how does he see me? Should I just keep my hair straight all the time, because that's how all the other white girls at my school keep their hair, and he's never really seen my hair curly. And at a young age, you're not having these deep, meaningful conversations about how hair is a part of your identity, and you don't want to have them ask you questions like, oh, why does your hair do that, or why does it look like this? So it was all just like walking on eggshells throughout high school, of like trying not to stand out too much, wanting to fit in, having to know what that fine line is. And in that dance, I lost myself. All throughout high school, I lost myself. And it wasn't until college that I really was able to branch out and to be myself and to fully embrace my hair, which was probably the biggest identity struggle that I had throughout my whole adolescence. And it wasn't until college that I was able to really look in the mirror and be okay with what my hair was in its natural state, and how that also just became reflective of just like everything else about my identity in college, that I could be. College was like a fresh start, and it's not like I went to a HBC or anything. I went to a PWI, but I was able to just be who who I wanted to be, and it was a clean slate, and I didn't have to force myself to identify with other people. I was still on the rowing team, so I was still around a lot of white people, but I also made Black friends in college, and that made all the difference because I finally found a community where I could be myself and relate to other people. The point of explaining all of this, of growing up as an African American woman in a predominantly white area and then having to really find yourself, is because I don't think that people really understood when I was growing up. The people now that I call my friends, I don't really know if they understood that because these were really silent struggles, you know, and I was very okay with stifling who I was supposed to be or who, you know, I really wanted to be. I was okay with doing that so that I could try to fit in, and I don't think a lot of people knew that because I obviously wasn't making a big deal about it. But I was very hyper aware of how people perceived me in high school and middle school. I was very hyper aware of how my behavior was, and the way that I spoke and the way that I looked. I was super hyper conscious of all those things, but very silently, and people didn't really know that, and they probably just thought that's just Rebecca, right? And I had a very white sounding name. I spoke well for my race. All of these things that people didn't really understand was really eating away at my identity and my ability to be confident and want to own my Blackness, really. I share that because I want people to know that those people who I grew up with in Arlington and in middle school and in high school and a little bit in college as well, that it was very uncomfortable for me to stifle that, and I want them to know that it's not necessarily their fault, right? It's not like they were telling me we don't like your hair, or they weren't telling me that they don't like if I were to talk another way. But I think that I don't think they realized that how much I was trying to fit in with them, and I just think it's important for them to know that, because everyone's asking me, can you help educate me a little bit better? Can you give me resources to understand racism in America better? For one, if you don't get it by now, if you haven't understood what racism is, I don't really know, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you've been living under a rock. I don't know if you didn't go to a history class in school. I mean, we've been learning about Jamestown since 4th grade, okay? So we've been learning about slavery since at least the 4th grade. So there should be nothing else really for you to understand beyond we started with slavery. So I mean, I just feel like when you start there, what more is there for you to get, you know? But I understand that a lot of people are very afraid and don't know how to use their words in a way where they're just afraid of like offending people or something. And so I get that, why people have been texting me that they want to learn how to be better and take better action and all that, and I appreciate the messages, but this is me saying that the best way for you to address your own actions, your own behavior, and try to understand racism better is to look at yourself and your own behavior. Think about when you grew up, how many Black people did you know? How many minorities did you know? And did you care to know them for themselves, or did you just only want to be friends with them if they conformed to your identity and the things that you were comfortable with and familiar with? Were you open and accepting to all types of Black people, or just the ones who acted like white people, or the ones who were not overly loud or aggressive? And not just Black people, but just other minorities as well. How many of these people did you know? How did you talk about them when they weren't in the room with you? How did you talk about them when they were in the room with you? And I think that's the best way to do it, is to just analyze yourself, because you might not even realize the things that you were actually complicit in at the time when you were younger. And those are the things that shape your view and your understanding of people now, your perception of other people now. That's what shaped it. Your experiences and interaction with African American men and women when you were growing up. So if your question is you want to learn how to be better, you've got to first analyze your own behavior, your own actions that you took, and not just now as a woke kid, but as when you were younger and you didn't really even think about racism, or you didn't even think about what you could be doing better to improve race relations in America? Like, when you were just learning about racism in class and slavery in class, what did you feel when you were learning about those things? Did you just think they were normal? Did you think they were just normally a part of our history? Or did it make you uncomfortable? I mean, there's just so many different things that you could look at within yourself, as opposed to asking Black people, how can you be better? Because there are instances, and probably so many more small interactions that you had when you were younger, growing up, that you don't even think about now until you actually reflect on it and say, oh wow, I actually remember when I was talking to that one person and this happened. Like, you have to really be willing to analyze yourself, really. Like, it's not about just pointing the finger at Donald Trump and being like, he's a racist, he's a misogynist, and labeling him. It's like, maybe you were complicit in stuff like that as well. It's just you weren't very blunt and out there about it, but it was like those little silent interactions that you don't even know, that you didn't even know then were actually very harmful to people around you. And now you can look back on it and be like, oh wow, I probably shouldn't have said that, or oh wow, I shouldn't have thought that, or whatever. So I mainly made this video because I wanted to talk about how my childhood had affected my sense of self growing up. And now, you know, I'm very much so, I'm different in that I have been able to own who I am and the way that I behave and how I look and my hair and everything. I'm so much more secure in those things, and I have, you know, found ways to forgive people in the past that have made me feel less than. I do still remember those instances, and they still shaped my thoughts and feelings today, but I'm mainly making this video because a lot of people have reached out to me, and I appreciate the texts. I do wish some people would actually call and not just text, because again, that's a very easy thing to do. But if you are actually willing to be uncomfortable so that you can really take action, like you say that you want to, then you should probably call. For people who have been sending me these messages asking me about how I feel or what they can do better, I really just ask that you think about yourself growing up, wherever you grew up in, and think about the people you interacted with, the people that you didn't interact with, and what those reasons were. And though not even just people that you were and weren't friends with, but just strangers in general. Like, what shaped your perception? Was it family members who told you things? Was it, I don't know, like the media? Like, whatever shaped you as a person, whatever played a role in your socialization growing up, you have to think about those things and be willing to analyze them, be willing to know where those things came from, where those thoughts came from. And you need to ask yourself, do you agree with that or do you not agree with that? And you have to be honest, because if you agree with them, then you've really got something else that you need to be worrying about and working on. And if you don't agree with them, then you need to figure out, one, how can you go back to that source and question and challenge them? And two, what are you going to do about it within your own life to make sure that you don't pass those same thoughts and perceptions and notions down to your children or whoever else that you're surrounded by? So I would say to stop looking outwards. You know, I do think it's important to educate yourself, reading texts and stuff, but how many books have we read? How many movies have we watched? Documentaries? Like, I just don't think it's that difficult. I think it's very simple to go straight to the source of your socialization. Maybe part of your socialization was school, like education system for sure. So maybe, you know, challenging the education system and going back and trying to read texts that you didn't read as a child growing up is going to be important in order to figure out where you get these ideas and notions from. But I also believe that a lot of it is in behavior, in the stereotypes that are passed down throughout generations, and being able and willing to just figure out where those came from and asking yourself, do I genuinely agree with this or do I not agree with this? Because it's very easy to say, I'm not a racist and I think that Black and white people should be equal, but it's also another thing to really look back at things that were kind of passed down and taught to you, like be aware of black men that are wearing a hoodie and sweatpants on the street, beware of how they look at you, and don't make eye contact with them, and don't say hi to them, or if you see them in the store. So I think being able to like say to yourself, well, do I agree with that statement? Because if I do agree with that statement, then you go back and that challenges your statement of I'm not a racist. So it's much more than just that big bold label of being a racist. It's what small little notions and stereotypes and ideas do you agree with or not agree with that actually do lead to some forms of racism that you're just not aware of, or discrimination. That's all I want to say on that, really. I think this is mostly to just people who have been texting me. And this is my answer to you, is thank you for the messages. Thank you for wanting to be there for me, wanting to be an ally. I think that's great. If you've been attending protests, that's awesome as well. But if all you're doing is just posting things on Instagram and saying that that's gonna be your call to action, that's gonna be how you're gonna get involved in this, then I would say you have a lot more work to do. But that's also only if you want to do it, and you have to be willing to answer that question yourself. I can't force you to want to do it for me, because I don't need you to do it for me. I just need you to do it for yourself, because you don't want to keep living the same way that you've been living in this lie that racism doesn't exist in America. So that's all for today. Next week I will continue with the law school series, because I just had to put a pause on that real quick and talk about what's been going on lately. So thank you if you've made it this far into this video, and I'll see you guys next week. Thanks guys. Bye.